strategies. With the European war beginning for the British, Wormwood is excited about all the fear and anguish that he sees in his patient. But Screwtape realizes that this may be dangerous to their cause and not always helpful. So I'm going to try and just go through the letter a little bit, each looking at different parts of it, and talk about it. At the beginning, he's talking about, Screwtape is writing saying, Wormwood, I'm upset that you're so excited about this European war and that people are going to be dying and suffering, and you're losing your head about it because you're not thinking straight about what our duty is. Wow, okay. I'm going to try and stand up and see if that will help. Test. Okay. So he's talking about the Wormwood's reaction to the war. And the devils are excited by the pain and suffering because of this start of the war. But Screwtape doesn't think it's nearly as helpful as you might think. And so Wormwood is warned about, but do remember, Wormwood, that duty comes before pleasure. You just can't sit around enjoying the suffering of the people here. And you need to get at your work. And he says, if any present self-indulgence on your part leads to the ultimate loss of the prey, you will be left eternally thirsting for that draught of which you are now so much enjoying your first sip. If, on the other hand, by steady and cool-headed application, here and now you can finally secure his soul, he will then be yours forever, a brimful, living chalice of despair.
So try this without the tape.
Okay. Okay, we'll see how that works. And so he's warning him that okay, we got to figure out a way to do this. Let's see, maybe I can. Yeah, we'll see how that works. We'll see. What he's talking about is if he loses his head, he'll have gotten a sip of this enjoyment of danger and terror that the humans are experiencing. But then if he loses his head, he loses the guy forever, then he'll lose it forever. If he gains the guy, he gets him forever. And so this is the devil is playing for serious stakes, eternal souls, eternal beings. Then he goes on to say, give me a full account of the patient's reactions to the war so we consider whether to make him an ardent extreme patriot or an ardent pacifist. And he's going to talk about that in a couple of letters, but what you see is the extremes are the danger. That the devil doesn't care whether you're a pacifist or a patriot. He'll use either way for his own good. Then he goes on to talk about the war and how it's entertaining. And then he talks a little bit about when I see the temporal suffering of humans who finally escape us, I feel as if I have been allowed to taste the first course of a rich banquet and then denied the rest. It is worse than not to have tasted it at all. So that again is the devils. Lewis is imagining that the devils are feasting on us and want us, not because they like us, but they want to use us. We're food to them. We're just a means to an end of their satisfaction. So I'm just trying to get you to think about Lewis's conception of evil and the devil is that he wants to use us for their sake, not for their own, for our sake. He's not trying to benefit us. He's trying to benefit himself, which is the opposite of God. God didn't need to make us. He chose to make us and made us for himself so that we might be what we were intended to become, that we might become what we are intended to be. So it's a very different, it's opposite ends of the spectrum here, what God wants for us and what the devil wants for us. And he also talks about, sort of interesting to me, that the enemy, true to his barbarous methods of warfare, allows us to see the short misery of his favorites only to tantalize and torment us, to mock the incessant hunger which, during this present phase of the great conflict, his blockade is admittedly imposing. And it's like, I think the devil, Lewis is trying to get us to understand that the devil is in war with God, and God is fighting. And so there's a blockade against the devil. And I take that to mean that God is working to protect us, that we have angels that are working for us to preserve us and keep us safe. And that the devils feel like they're losing this battle because there's this imposing blockade. And then he comes to what to me is a key word, a sentence. Let us therefore think how to use then let us therefore think rather how to use than how to enjoy this European war. You might think that evil is that war is always bad, and it is. But even God can use it for good and bring good things out of it. Just like a crucifixion is always bad, but God gets a resurrection out of it. And only God can do that. So then he talks about several things that he's worried about or thinks some strategies. And these are sort of some of the marks that we've got, the strategies listed. First one was about the extreme patriot or ardent pacifist. The second was hope for cruelty and unchastity for the soldiers involved. That let's see what we can do to make fighting bad for them, either through unchastity or cruelty. One of the things that shocked me about the first Gulf War was some of the torture that was done to people that I would have thought we wouldn't do, but we did. And that's that hope for cruelty that the devil was wanting in World War II. Then he gives them a warning: beware of the war, because God will be pleased, because many people will seek him, but also that they'll think of something more than themselves, higher than themselves. They'll care about their country for the first time sometimes. They'll care about their soldiers, their comrades. They'll care about people that they didn't think they cared about before, maybe Poles or Czechoslovakians or whatever it is, other groups that are in this war. Also beware of the war. It's not an unallied good for the devil, because people will know that they are going into situations where they might die and are prepared to die. Our best weapon is contented worldliness when people think they will live forever. Our best strategy for death is not war. As much as we might think, or the devil would be in favor of war, but there's drawbacks to war because our best strategy for death is in costly nursing homes surrounded by lying people lying about the imminence of death, instead of people going into battle knowing that they very likely could die, or that think of this during the bombing of London, and people every night or many nights going into bunkers and running to bunkers or going into their basements because they don't want to get out because they're afraid they're going to be bombed. And many people were bombed and killed during those raids. So, and then at the end, of course, let's see, that last paragraph. The enemy's human partisans will have been plainly told by him that suffering is an essential part of what he calls redemption, so that a faith which is destroyed by a war or a pestilence cannot really have been worth the trouble of destroying. That sort of surprised me that he would say it that way, because I'm assuming Lewis sort of thinks that if our faith is destroyed by something bad happening to us, then it may not be a very strong faith. Of course, at the precise moment of terror, bereavement, or physical pain, you may catch your man when his reason's temporarily suspended. His reason is temporarily suspended. So you might be able to get him in a bad situation. You might be able to get him to turn away from God. But then he makes this final point, the last sentence or so. But even then, if the Christian applies to the enemy headquarters, I have found that the post is nearly always defended. In other words, when we're in our worst situations and we turn to God, we find he answers. He speaks. He gives us his presence to get us through. And that to me was one of the best parts of the letter. So let's look at some of the questions. How can danger, like living in the midst of war, hinder the cause of Christ? Or how can it help the cause of Christ? Catherine's going to take this around, and if you've got a comment. How do you think danger hinders the cause of Christ?
I was reading a couple books that were written by soldiers on the ground in World War II in the Pacific, and I saw this all the time. In fact, one of the guys was specifically very concerned about his fellow troops because he saw that it was making them bitterly angry at the Japanese, and they were even starting to do some of the horrible things the Japanese were doing to Americans. And so they became really callous and really bitter and not at all, hating their enemy very much.
Yeah.
So
war can cause soldiers to become very bitter and angry and vindictive even. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's one of the ways war is horrible. War is hell. Other ways, Sarah?
Well, I think
Wait just a moment.
I think about when a really bad disaster happens, like the thing in North Carolina wiped out so many people, or a war, and people tend to go, God, why would you let this happen? Mm-hmm. And then sometimes they can turn away because they're like, how could he let something like this happen if he's so all-powerful? And you're either going to go one way sometimes or the other, or change during a disaster, but your faith gets you through. So it can help in that way, but then I think some people, kind of like Phil was saying, they get bitter and like, how could you let this happen?
Yeah. Lots of times when bad things happen, people stop trusting God. They say, I don't know whether God's reliable anymore. To me, that's sort of hard to imagine, because when you read the Bible, Jesus did die. He got murdered. Paul, all the apostles suffered for their faith. Many of the early Christians died for their faith. And in the Bible, God's people the Exodus. I mean, not the Exodus, but the exile. That people are the whole city is destroyed. And so God is at work in all of that. And we, who are people of the book, who have read these stories and know these stories, should be less susceptible to that than others. But it does. You can stop trusting God. You can think he doesn't care. Or you can forget about God and just focus on the fear. You can be afraid and worried and be consumed by that and not able to turn yourself toward God. What are ways, though, that it helps? How does it help the cause of Christ? Catherine?
Well, my mom used to always say, out of bad, good can come. In any disaster or danger, you can look at the disaster and say, well, it's now brought some enlightenment to humanity, helping the people that went through the atrocities of the disaster, as Sarah mentioned maybe, or even in war, you'll start looking at this, instead of hating, what's going on in the war, you'll start saying, well, gosh, this is a horrible thing all together, and, just kind of, really appreciate and look to God towards the humanity part of, the human side of things where, war can be horrible,
Yeah.
And it's,
We can be horrible to ourselves. It's not God to blame.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not God. And it's just, what are we doing to ourselves? And there's always two sides to a story. My wife always talked about there's two sides or three sides to it. It's hers and it's hers and but so we don't really know the reasons behind the things that go wrong and why things are the bad things happen, but it can, like, again, bring out the humanity in us and the helpful part. And let's say, and actually there have been wars where, we've come back and turned around and helped the individuals, whether it be food or resources and stuff. So there are plenty of wars where we've helped rebuild country, exactly. And, with God in mind, to try to help people.
Yeah, good. What other ways can it help the cause of Christ? I think one of the things that happens in a war is people feel helpless and they need help. And they maybe sometimes for the first time they felt out of control. I know a lot of people love control and being able to control everything about their situation. And when there's a war, you can't even, you can't control anything. And when you realize that, you can turn to somebody else for help, and that can be God. I think that happens often in war or when we're in danger. And also I think when people are facing death, I think they may not, they may get bitter, but they can say, God, I can't handle this. I don't know what, I've always grown up in the church, so I don't know what it's like to be an atheist. But I can imagine being an atheist and being afraid to die. And I can imagine that could open them up to Christ if they're willing. So those are other ways. Any other ways you can think how danger can help the cause of Christ?
I think you can see personal experiences in your life too. You can write them off to circumstances or whatever. Or you can write it off to miracles, and I think a lot of people have heard our limousine story in New York. So I don't know, it was just it can't all be circumstances. There was divine intervention.
Yeah.
So I think that encourage us and people with their experiences, it encourages them to that way have a positive outcome. I'm not sure about negative outcomes, how that would affect your faith, but how can you write it off to It just happened. It just didn't happen.
Yeah.
One thing that hits me is we as Protestants have a hard time accepting suffering can be a part of God, which was what he says in there. That's part of redemption. So when we suffer, we don't have to think we did something wrong or how do I get out of this? I've brought it up before. The book, The Hardest Peace by Kara Tippett, is a beautiful story of a woman who died of cancer at 37.
Wow.
But she knew it was the hardest piece, doing what God wanted her to do. So I was thinking about negative. It's just how we look at it.
Yeah, often it is our
Yeah.
attitude. Yeah. Dave, did you want to?
I like the miracles better.
Well, I was just going to add a comment to what he was talking about. Many good things come out of tragedy, and you think about the Charlie Kirk assassination and the movement that followed that. A lot of analogies apply to that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Now, RC shared, but how has a personal situation of danger or imminent death affected you? Did it draw you closer to God or push you away? And I'll start with a story. I was a young pastor, associate pastor, and one of the key leaders in the church was going in for surgery. He was having heart surgery. I think it was for a blockage. And I go in to pray with him that morning. I'm not sure why I was there. I was the associate. I should have been senior pastor down there, but it was maybe 6 in the morning, so maybe that's why. But I went down there to just pray with him, and I don't even remember what I said, but as I said something to him, he just started choking up and crying. And I realized he's scared. And I went under the what do they call it when they do the little balloon they went in to see whether I had any blockages. And I didn't have any. And but I remember thinking, I'm not worried. I don't think I'm going to die. I don't think I'm sick. I'm sure. And he didn't find anything. And but I didn't realize that I was young and stupid enough to think nobody's worried about dying, but he was, and that was his chance. I wish I'd handled it better and said, "How are you doing?" or "How can I pray for you?" or "What are you afraid of?" Asking him directly. But he was, I realized he was afraid he might die. And I'm glad he was, I don't remember exactly what he said, but I'm glad he didn't just fake it and say, "Oh, I'm fine. It's okay." He realized the seriousof his situation. I know a guy who was in a parachute accident. He was falling, and he wasn't falling well. He was going down like this, which is not a good sign. And somebody asked him, did you pray? And he said, "No, I forgot to. I didn't think that was a good sign." That's the time when you want to pray. When I remember driving my car in, I was a driver for a bank, and I was on 285, and it was being expanded. Can't expand much more now, but it was being expanded, and I hit a little wet spot, and I turned around and was facing traffic. Now, luckily, as I slid over, I went into the place that was being widened, so no traffic was there. I don't remember praying then either, but afterwards I did. I'll tell you that. But when have you had a situation like that? And did it draw you closer to God or push you away, if you're willing to share? Dave?
Most people find God when they're
Yeah. Oh, Dave.
Well, I will tell you right before you jump out of a plane, you always say God's will, and God be with me. So you always say that.
Okay. Okay. RC.
I think you have to make a choice sometimes whether you pray or whether you act. And guy jumping out of an airplane and yeah, you know, do you pray or do you act? So I mean, yeah, I guess you try and cover yourself and do that too. But like I watched the guys. One of my first jobs in the Air Force was a drop zone guy. And I watched these young kids at Fort Benning come out and get May West. Their chutes were not properly inflated. And you see these kids scrambling. They had a reserve pack on their chest. The main chute is bad, so they're trying to deploy. They have to manually deploy this reserve chute on their chest. And you can see guys just scrambling up there. And not sure they had time to pray. So it's better to pray before, I guess.
Yeah.
So. And to pray for Thanksgiving after, I think, too. So,
Yeah.
So our 2-year-old was diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia. And when we got there at St. Jude, only 3% lived. But there was no other choice but to trust God. I don't know if he was so alive in me. I mean, there were times, y'all, that I sat and I said, you said all you have to have is a mustard seed of faith, and that's exactly what I have. But he always honored that. I mean, Emily lived. She's 51 now. But, and she's head injured. So that's a whole different scenario. But I don't know how you would, in the face of death, how do you step away from the living God? And Ernest is going to tell, this is harder.
We were on a mission trip in Honduras in 2007, and 3 of our friends were killed in a truck accident. And normally I'm on that truck as we drop off people at the houses where we're going to pour concrete and everything. I think the thing we have to be careful of when something happens, that we're not quick to blame God, but trust in him to the point that blaming him just doesn't enter your mind, you know, so.
Good. There are lots of, in the Psalms, how long, O Lord? But almost all the Psalms are the Psalms of lament, which are most of the Psalms, are, God, where are you? Why did you let this happen? And then there's a turning somewhere, but I trust you that you will provide and you'll take care of me. That's almost all the Psalms of lament, except for Psalm 88. It is the only one that says, God, where are you? When are you going to act? I'm in darkness. And that's how it ends. And so even that is in Scripture. God, I feel abandoned by you. And there is no but. That's it. And that's a legitimate way to feel. But being able to say that, that's a wonderful thing about the Psalms, is that the Psalms allow you to say those kinds of things to God. And he doesn't say, hey, don't talk to me that way. He says, thank you for talking to me. I read this book, and when we did a study on the difficult sayings in the Bible, and one of them was about the Psalms of vengeance in the Old Testament, like Psalm, I can't remember, it's by the river of Babylon, that psalm, and in it, in the book that we looked at, the guy was saying the wonderful thing about this is not this claiming a vengeance, but turning it over to God. It's saying, God, we love you, we trust you, we give these evil people to you for you to take care of them. It's not vengeance, it's not I'm going to do this, God, or let's us do this. It's God, we'll trust you to do what's right and judge correctly. How do we know if we are one of those people who is infected with contented worldliness? Because that's what he says. You know, the devil says, one of our best weapons, contented worldliness, is rendered useless in war because you're afraid you're going to die. But what about if you're not afraid you're going to die? I think when I retired, I had led churches for 30 years. I'd preached weekly for about 25 years. And I felt close to God. But when I retired, I didn't preach anymore. I didn't have anybody to preach to. Catherine wouldn't let me preach to her. And so I think, and we've talked about our giving. We said, how do we give until it hurts? Because it doesn't hurt to give generously anymore because we've got all this money in retirement. And so I feel much more susceptible to contented worldliness than I ever have before. I don't think I did when I was a pastor because I had to live by faith. When we didn't have that retirement money, it was in the retirement money, and we hadn't retired till we couldn't use it. And giving was costly to us. We had to say, what do we give up? If we give to the church and give this away, how are we going to live? How do we live on less? And that's, so I worry about that. How do you know if you are one of those people who's infected with contented worldliness? How would a person know that? Phil?
I think we need to use, the liturgical seasons properly, and our pastors are great at explaining that you can't be totally introspective all the time about something like that.
Totally what?
You can't be totally introspective all the time, okay? But I would say use the season of Lent for what it's meant for. So and there are lots of tools out there that will help you examine your life carefully. But the other thing is always every day asking, am I totally devoted to God? And I use a prayer that I devote myself to God totally every day.
Yeah.
So, that's my
Good.
opinion.
Good. Hold on.
It's hard. I think you can give up the attitude of gratitude kind of thing. That it isn't mine, wasn't mine, was a gift to me, that kind of thing too. So when you get out of that mind frame that I did this, the me thing, I think that gets you away for I'm comfortable where I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have to say thank you.
Yeah. Good.
I think when you don't notice those that are hurting, you don't notice those around you that are in need, because that means your heart's hardened.
Yeah. Good.
So thank you. I think when you have a lot of material things, wealth, money, and you're comfortable in the world, we have a tendency to, we're okay, right? We're fine. But I think that you kind of have to realize that, this is just, you're not going to take it with you. And I think when you're worried about losing all your money, your possessions, and the things that you have, that's kind of like when you know,
Yeah.
I'm holding on. Oh, I'm afraid of losing all this wealth and money. And that's when faith comes in. You know, I think my mom used to always tell me, even when we had the least amount of stuff, she's like, oh, someone else is way worse than you. You should be thankful and grateful for just the morsels that you have.
Yeah.
You know, we might have been eating out of a can or something like that, or not even had a place to stay, you know, when we came here. So, you know, we've gone through what we thought were hard times, but, you know, and that's when, you know, I think your faith can come in, because it can be taken from you just like that. As quick as you got it, you can get it taken away just as easily. So I think, you know, you have to constantly remind yourself, well, am I holding on to this? I remember once in this church that I had gone to, they had us fast. And the fast was not just fasting, like a physical fast, you know, just eating. And, you know, we had to strip ourselves of the things that we were holding on to, like music that we shouldn't be listening to, or, you know, items that we should, or we were hoarding or holding on to, and we just had to get rid of it. And it felt hard. I had a CD that I held over the trash can. I was like, oh no, I paid money for this. Why am I? So I had to relinquish some of those things that were worldly to come to, you know, realization that, you know, we don't really, those are those things, we don't really need those more important things. So,
Yeah.
anyway.
Good. I remember Carl Menninger, who wrote the book, Whatever Became of Sin, I think is the title of it. He was talking about how do you help somebody who's depressed. And his advice was go across the tracks and help somebody less fortunate than you. And in AA, if an alcoholic wants to stay sober, if he's struggling to stay sober, they say, well, go find another alcoholic and help him. And it's really serving others. Not only just noticing the hurting people, but doing something about it, helping people. Oh, Sarah.
Talk about something that happened to me, you know, that it was something that brought me even closer to God was actually imminent death. My brother-in-law was there when he died, and it kind of gave me a lot of peace. But he had been in World War II and fought in France and stuff. He was 96 when he passed away. But as he died, he had a sitter with him, but he was staring. One, he was looking at pictures that he thought were people that he had fought with just before he died, and he was looking up like that. And I asked the sitter, who had been with a lot of people, and she said every person she'd been with when they died, they were always looking up and praying. And it kind of gave me a peace, because I'm like, you know, that's such a horrible thing. And he was a wonderful person, had a wonderful life. But anyway, it drew me closer to God.
Thank you. How do you feel about talking about death? How do you feel talking about death with someone who is sick? How might it help the sick person to talk about their possibly soon death? As a pastor, I haven't really had many opportunities to do that. Usually, I'm not there at that moment when they find out they've got a terminal illness, or often I'll end up, there were usually a lot of people in our church that were tangential to our church. They were members, but I never saw them. And so sometimes I wouldn't come in until the last moment, or when they're in a coma or things like that. So I didn't have a lot of opportunities to do that. But talking with that gentleman, I wish I'd talked to him. There was the man who was having heart surgery. Wish I'd gone in a little earlier and asked him how he was doing. And I have talked to people and said, are you afraid? Are you scared? Are you okay? What do you think? You know, and just begin to ask them things to get them to open up. And Catherine's mom died a few years ago, and Catherine was able to be with her. And she said, did you say, Mom, let's say the Lord's Prayer? And her mom said, does this mean we're at the end? And she said, yes. And it was. And that's a gift to give some, you know, I always say I want to die in my sleep and never, you know, just wake up in heaven. I don't want to have cancer and, you know, go through the hard thing.
I want to kill the 4 people screaming in the car.
That's my favorite joke. Yeah. And it's a wonderful gift to know that you're about to meet your Lord. And it doesn't have to be a terrible thing, and it shouldn't be a terrible thing. It should be a terrible thing for those who are left behind because they've lost somebody dear to them. But it doesn't have to be a terrible thing for you as you die because you know where you're going. You know who loves you and where somebody said doorways cut in sod, that in the cemetery it's a doorway cut in sod. It's a pathway to God. So how do you feel about talking about death with someone? Anybody want to share?
Well, my husband knows, and well, I was in the military 25 years, so I was gone away from my family a lot. My mom, I was fortunate to be, it's my last deployment. I think she just held on because she didn't want me to go back again. And she was terminally ill, and she was young. She was only 67. And she actually passed away. I was still gone out of the state, but she actually passed away, and she had a DNR, but she came back. And so they revived her because they didn't know her DNR was on file. And so I got to talk to her, and she seemed to be fine, and she was sitting and we were FaceTiming her because I was away at school. We were FaceTiming, and I was like, Mom, do I need to come home? She said, yes, you need to come home. So I had to go home, and I was the last person with her. But I was hoping that I could be as brave as she was, and I don't think I will ever be as brave as she was because I was there with her before she lost consciousness. And she told me just that life is for the living and to let her go, that she was already with God. And her mother, my grandmother, was waiting on her. And I got to kiss her goodbye. And I stayed with her the night, and she never regained consciousness, but I after 25 years, you know, I just got to stay with her. I went home to change, and she left before I could get back. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, I couldn't be mad, and I was sad, and I was very angry, but her last words were to me was that, don't be afraid, I'm already with God. Mm-hmm. She said, I'm afraid. She did say she was afraid, though. She's like, I am afraid, but I'm already with God, and my mother is waiting on me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. And it seems like your mom helped you prepare for that. And yeah.
So afraid you don't. At that point, you're just so afraid. You pray, you make promises,
Yeah.
and then you don't really comprehend. You don't really think about it. When you're in war, you don't even. It's not what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
You just don't think about it. So
Yeah.
I really never really experienced that until talking to my mom, you know, watching my mom pass, actually watching her pass. And so And I told us, like, I pray to God when my time comes that I can be this strong. I don't know.
Yeah. So what we're trying to talk about is the danger for the devil of danger. That you might think being in a dangerous situation is a bad thing, but it may be a good thing because it will remind you of your vulnerability, your need for God, all those things. So let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this time together. I thank you, Lord, for the folks who shared from their hearts tonight, the stories that we heard. Lord, I thank you that you are looking after us, that you are working with us. You have given us angels to protect us. Lord, help us to remember that we are in a battle, we are in a war, and that there is an enemy seeking us, and that you are with us, fighting on our side. In Jesus' strong name we pray. Amen. So we'll meet next week and the week after. And then Father Michael will start on January, whatever that date is. Arise and go in peace. I didn't strangle myself.
Get it stopped.
No, I didn't know which to.
End stream.